right, good evening, everyone. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
You noticed it too?
So thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. Trustee Allen and I just came from the climate change protest at Agawam Park. We had a good group of people down there, pushing for clean water, against climate change and obviously for our environment, which I know we obviously care a lot about in Southampton Village, which is the perfect introduction for Kevin McAllister for public comment.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor, Trustees. Kevin McAllister. I'm founder and president of Defend H2O. I've been before this board a number of times over the years in my prior role as the baykeeper. I wanted to address some issues with Lake Agawam, and I've been, of course, following the commentary, the conversation revolving around Agawam. First and foremost, I'm very pleased that the board has recommitted itself to finding solutions for impaired water body. I want to address specifically wastewater, and I know that's been obviously bantered around to a great extent on a larger scale, as well as improvements to water quality in Agawam. I would like to start by saying I was in part instrumental in introducing the innovative alternative systems back in 2005 and 6 when I became aware of them in addressing issues in Forge River in Massac, Mauritius area, where it certainly was demonstrated that wastewater was a big influence. One of the things that struck me was ultimately the lack of embracing the IA systems. I'm very pleased that Suffolk County is fully committed into introducing these systems. They're going through a regular review of new systems coming online. The improved water quality and performance is good to see, and ultimately with offsetting costs and streamlining the permitting process. With respect to Agawam, and this is really an area that I had researched some years ago, for your information, obviously, the state of New York is really the governing body around wastewater regulations, and they delegate down to Suffolk County Department of Health Services. This board, if it determines it's appropriate, could absolutely set up an overlay district, impose more stringent standards. That is allowed by state statute. It was challenged some years back up in the Catskills. The town prevailed and was able to impose greater restrictions than, in that case, the state of New York. So this is obviously something the board can consider. In around 2012, I, as baykeeper, had engaged Lombardo and Associates to really embark on an analysis of Lake Agawam. And I'll say that it reinforced what I believe to be true, certainly from my experience as an environmental scientist in dealing with sediments and dredging, that the nutrient flux in the pond, in the lake, was significant and a real issue that needs to be addressed. And while we talk about wastewater, increasing buffers on the waterfront properties, these are all laudable objectives, but we cannot lose sight of the fact that we got to deal with the sediments, because ultimately the chronic release of nutrients triggering these algal blooms, the die-off. So it's a chronic cycle that we've seen for 10 years or longer, certainly as long as I've been paying attention to the summer water quality in Agawam. I'm very interested in the sediment sampling and ultimately the characterization of the bottom. I think that was a really important first step. I'm sorry?
We're at 3 minutes.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll close up. That was a really important first step to really characterize the conditions. I look forward to the information, and I just urge this board while it may be a costly prospect, it is very likely costly. I think to really find true results, we're going to have to deal with the sediments. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Is there any other additional public comment? Okay. Things are a little quieter today without Evelyn being here, but we'll have to move on nonetheless. So our first up, we've got board presentations tonight. That's going to be the heliport parking site plan with Steve, and then Steve's got a second plan after that regarding the Moses Lane Park.
Good evening, Mayor, Trustees. My name is Steve Naroda with Aris Design in Southampton. Here, as part of a follow-up from our last presentation, we left with the question whether the homeowner was willing to extend the maintenance period. And he's agreed to extend it to 5 years, and he's working on the documents to preparing to submit them as such.
Thank you, Steve.
Yeah.
One other thing, just for everyone who's here tonight who came for our local law, that is coming up. We're going to move our public hearings up before the discussion items just to get this going, because I know everyone has time commitments and has to be other places tonight. So if that's all we have there, we'll move forward with the Moses Lane Park proposal. And then at some point, I believe we also have Tony Piazza coming to discuss and hopefully get some input from you as well, but how we can make this this park organic, chemical-free, as ecologically friendly as possible, and then use this park also as an example for the rest of Long Island, the state, to really serve as a paradigm for what should be the most appropriate ecologically.
Real quick question. Wayne, is there anything with regards to the heliport parking site plan, or should we just...
No, I think what I've talked to the representatives about what instruments which they were offering also, which has been consistent with prior projects, and my understanding that they plan to get that in so that you can take an action at your next meeting.
Thanks.
That's really wanted to know if you were extending.
That's what I was looking for, whether we're doing something tonight.
Okay.
Good, thank you.
Thanks. Thank you for asking it.
Okay, great. Yeah, Steve Naroda with Aris Design, Southampton. So the plan before you is the conceptual site plan that we had presented to the previous board. The plan, the property is 11 acres, approximately 11 acres. Had originally, back in the past, it was proposed to be a multifamily development. It was purchased through CPF funding, and it's been allotted as a park. And it was the tennis court use, bocce courts was something that was requested and stated as a desired use within the village. So the thought was to use this park to create that setting. Here you go.
Thank you, Julie.
So again, the park, it's approximately 11 acres. There are 3 tennis courts proposed and 4 bocce courts. We also show walking trails throughout the park. There's a larger loop. Should I continue? Wait. Should I continue, or should I wait for you? Okay. So there's a larger loop designed for a walking trail. It's approximately 0.5 miles, and then the smaller loop is a quarter mile. Sorry. Thank you. So the larger loop is approximately half a mile, and the smaller loop is about a quarter mile. Sorry.
Comes a disaster.
Then just put the mic
There
there.
you go. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So we presented this to the previous board, and it was approved, and we were went ahead with construction drawings. So we were at a 50% level of construction detailing for this project. In presenting the 50% design plans there were some questions that came up with regarding to how many courts they want to use, and there were other questions that we came here tonight to answer or to help clarify.
I was hoping, obviously, Tony would, he may be running late, but what questions that he asked, as well as questions that Anita Von Gaal asked from our prior,
Sure.
presentations, and Trustee Allen, feel free to jump in here. We had discussed native plantings. We were kind of interested about the composition of what the plantings would look like.
Sure.
Certain benches, compostable bathrooms, things like that, permeable pavement. Just maybe if you can elaborate on to the extent that we're using those and if we could work them in further.
Sure. So the plantings, so far we've focused on the hardscape materials and in the design development portion of it. Plantings, we're working with the village there's a lot of native blue stem, little blue stem that's on the property already. It was previously used as a nursery, so there's other plant material there as well. But there is a mix of natives and non-natives. There's a lot of cedar, which is a native tree. So what we're trying to do is look at how we can reuse what's there and then augment and supplement. There was costs that we were trying to keep below, so we wanted to work with the village in kind of phasing a planting plan. The first priority was to sink these courts, to use grading to sink them, and then use the fill or the cut from the courts to create a berm around the courts to help buffer sound and attenuate the noise going into the adjacent residential community. So with that, we focus on that component of the project. So the plantings around the court tend to be evergreen screening plants, just to help buffer. But yet we have approximately another 8 acres to work with developing a meadow type of planting. So we think it was great that, if you want to bring in consultants to work with in how this is maintained, I think it's a great idea. Yeah.
Thank you. And sorry to put you on the spot, but if there's any, is there any reason why we need the non-native plants or opted for them? Was it just a price issue, or?
No, we have not called for non-native plants.
Okay.
So really, the material choices can be all native plant material.
Right.
The idea is to have evergreen plantings around the tennis courts themselves. Otherwise, the site itself has regenerated, and there's a lot of little blue stem, as I mentioned earlier, and there's some cedar. So we were looking at what we could transplant, move to help utilize what's there.
Yeah. I just wanted to say quickly, originally we were looking at this, we were around 1.5 million, and to get this project done, we pared it back as much as we possibly could to get the courts built, the roads built, sidewalks, curbs, etc. We decided to take out all planting whatsoever just to get everything up and running, and then planting anything else on the property would be a phase 2.
And that includes the evergreens, that's part of it or not part of it?
The evergreens around the tennis court were part of the plant estimate. Yeah.
And then I know you conducted a decibel study, which
Yes.
was very good, and it came back as de minimis, there will be no sound. But was there ever a traffic study contemplated for the entrance to the park?
A traffic study, not in particular.
Okay, because
no.
I thought we had discussed where that entrance would be, and at one point it had shifted a bit. Am I correct in that?
And you want to screen, Gary, because there's actually rules why that.
Yeah, there are rules.
Yeah, we started out with it being an intersection. The driveway to the park was going to be directly across from Corrigan there. But we had several people came to a board meeting and said they did not want that. They thought it'd be too much traffic, so we were asked by the previous board to move the driveway down, and the furthest we could move it on that site was about 30 feet just to offset it. And then since then, Arrays came in and says, well, it's not a good idea to do that, but that roadway is in temporarily right now. Blend is down. It can be moved. But we should decide, because it's where it is where we'd like to leave it at this point.
And where is it in comparison to what's noted on the map?
It's really just about the diameter of the road over, so it's about another 30 feet over would be right in here. And it was just enough to offset so that traffic wasn't flowing directly across. So it'd be right there.
That will be the new entrance?
That's the existing entrance that we would like to leave. Should we want to change it, we can.
Were there any other reasons why you needed to stay, like other, state rules or anything like that, or traffic rules?
I'd go back to Steve on that, but there is a rule that says you either should match it up or it has to be a further distance away. But being that it's not a state road, we were comfortable in doing that.
Yeah, typically, if it's not lined up, you have to have a offset of about 150 feet.
Right, and that's what I remember the discussion, because if we went too far, and we can't go that, we don't have enough room to go west on that because of the adjacent home.
Right, right.
So it kind of has to be where it is really what we're saying. More.
Yeah, more or less, yes. From a safety standpoint, yeah. And then question about the permeable pavements, everything, that just increases budget. So that's where we're designing this to accommodate a budget that was stated to us. But obviously, if we want to introduce that, that's something that we'd have to discuss.
Following up on that point that the mayor mentioned earlier, the ante seems higher now in protecting our environment, and I think what we're hearing is a much greater appetite to see this as more of an eco park than just a park as it's been constructed in years gone by. And it's not that anyone's doing anything wrong, it's just that everyone's much more sensitive to the environment than they've ever been. So anyway, that's how I feel. I don't know how anybody else feels about it. And that's also the feedback I'm getting from the community, quite frankly. So a question was posed to me, and I don't know this answer, and maybe Counselor can help us, that the tennis court really shouldn't be sunken because that's not good for the environment. I know in our code we require that tennis courts are to be sunken, but I think we should probably kind of revisit that and just check and see if that's really true, and you being in this business might be able to comment on it as to whether that's...
Though. That's how they got the decibel down. That's why the evergreens are to do two things, screen the noise, and sinking it does the same thing.
That would just go contrary to the village code. We'd have to look at that.
Right. But that's the only reason why we're sinking tennis courts these days is because we have a village code that currently says that. But what I'm hearing is that's not necessarily the route to go. And I'm not saying that we're wrong, but I think we should revisit it.
Why isn't the route to go? What's wrong with it? I don't know.
Because it's not, well, maybe other people can weigh in on it, but the feedback we're hearing is it's not as good for the environment to have sunken tennis courts.
How?
I'm only...
I don't know.
You're not hearing that?
No, I haven't heard that. But
Okay.
I don't know how that would make a difference, but...
Okay. Anyway, it helps in the sound decibel reduction,
it does,
definitely.
absolutely.
And then on the permeable, there's no permeable option for the tennis court. Is it just for the walkways, or is it for both?
Mainly for the walkways. You can do walkways, parking areas, even the driveway aisle can be permeable.
And that hasn't been factored into the budget as of...
No.
So
Not
we do
this
grass
time.
tennis courts?
So if we were to factor that in, would you be coming back to us with that price increase before you go out for the bidding?
I think that would be appropriate, yeah, because you're looking at probably can double the cost of hardscape materials.
We obviously want to move quickly. The two of us could look at some grants that might be available. I'm sure there's got to be some grants out there for more environmentally conscious parks and things like that. So we'll look into that. That might slow up the process, but we also want to move quickly. I know it's hard to do both, but that would be helpful. And then a couple quick questions. Benches, do we have any benches here?
Yeah, that'd be site benches,
Okay.
but that's part of developing it with the village. We
Okay.
can cite those, and wasn't a major component of the project at the early stages, but it's something that can be incorporated easily.
Okay.
This is more for Gary. Gary, time frame, I know we want to try and get this for next summer. Where are we on a deadline of trying to do that versus looking at grants, looking at, restudying some things and stuff like that?
Can you also speak about the grants that we've applied for, and if there's timeframes on those as well?
I don't actually know the deadline on the grant here. We applied to the grant July 26th, and I don't believe we're going to hear back from that until about January on that. The total project was just over $600,000. The grant would be 50% of that, so we're hoping that'll move forward. I just want to touch base on the permeables there. We did talk with the previous mayor about using gravel in there, not permeable paving, but it does basically the same thing. And also the rec trail that is going in has been all placed with millings. We've done that over the course of a year, so we spent quite a bit of time putting that down, and that is not permeable. That would all have to be removed at a cost. And what we're trying to do right now is take what we decided with the site plan kind of as is, move forward now, with what the direction we gave Arrays already, and go. If we decide to delay, I don't think we'll make summer. We would probably be looking about doing this in the fall.
Thanks.
And a couple other quick things. We are also discussing about specific types of irrigation or lack thereof, just so we're using as little water as possible. And also, we, of course, don't want to use any pesticides, herbicides. If we're using fertilizers, which we don't want to, organic, everything according to the same standards that we have to help clean our lake and things like that.
Yeah, the thought was to temporary irrigation for establishment period, particularly for the plantings that are around the tennis court. And then anything outside of that, that's pretty much left to, it's all native plant material. So as long as it gets established, it'll survive.
All right, excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you, Steve. So the next, thank you very much. That was a great presentation. We're looking forward to working with you, and we appreciate it. So the next board presentation, which we're all really excited about, will be Chick Voorhees regarding the Lake Agawam sediment testing. We hope you have good news, but we're prepared for the worst.
Here's hopeful news.
We'll see.
Switch that over.
Charlie, what are you doing? I think he's got it.
And then again, we'll move right to the local laws for all the business owners and those people interested.
So just for a second, so where do we leave with the Moses Lane Park?
We're hoping for a resolution to move forward on it, but I don't know if you're...
So exactly. So what do we just decide tonight?
I'm not sure we decided much of anything.
Exactly.
But,
So where are we going? Sorry, Chick.
We are hoping to give the okay to Arrays to continue designing the courts. Right now, they're at the 50% level. If we are okay with the amount of courts, the locations of courts, we would move forward with them to prepare documents. If you want to weigh in about adding other things to it, it's going to change the price tag of it. So what I said before, we're trying to phase this. If we can stick to the plan right now, if you're happy with it, and then do all the site amenities, the plantings as a phase 2 later on, that will allow us to move the project forward and hopefully get it in by summer.
Well, have we ascertained that, or what are we sending him off with? Are we at a standstill? That's kind of what the impression I got.
I guess I'm fine moving forward with a phase 2 with these other additions. Trustee Allen, do you have an opinion on this?
Well, I would like to see the permeable. I think the former mayor's idea of gravel, would that not work with the milling, or no?
No, because the milling will pack down. So the milling right now, even though it's slightly permeable, the more you go on it, the harder it's going to stick together. It's going to turn back into an asphalt road. And we basically have a half mile of a foot thick that we've put down over the past year. It's going to be much more cost to remove it.
I'm sorry, what was that, Counselor?
I think the design, wasn't that also to comply with the ADA requirements?
Yeah, we started out, we actually wanted to make the whole thing out of wood chips. And then we did talk about ADA and strollers. So right now, the base that is going down is millings all the way around. And then we didn't determine what the finish would be, if that would be a soft surface or an asphalt surface. The only thing about the rec trail is that it's really about 10 feet wide at this point, and there's plenty of real estate to sidecast that water to either side.
And on the courts, Gary?
The courts it's going to be a solid surface, so it would just be the grass area around and the drainage below that. I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we need any sort of resolution to continue. I just need a consensus that we're not going in the wrong direction. So if we want to take a day or something, and then we can get together and talk about it again, I just don't want it to be another week, or we're going to be past summertime.
The village has adopted a budget of up to $50,000 right now for arrays and other preliminary work that needs to get done. So the budget's in place. It's just a matter of getting a direction, because I don't think the village would want to spend the entire $50,000 and then decide that we're going to redesign. So I think that's where we're at.
If I may chime in, I think what the direction was is that the concept has been out there. We're now moving towards bid specifications. So, of course, the detail on whether you're bidding out permeable pavers versus the other alternatives certainly makes a big difference in what their design is. So as you heard, it sounds like he's 50% there. He's not 100%, so there's certainly time for your input to modify that and come back. And I'm sure Steve can provide you with some of the difference in the numbers as compared to just, off the top of your head estimate, it's going to be double the price. And maybe there's elements that you can do, not completely, there's certain parts, I would imagine, like the entrance driveway, you may need to keep it paved because of certain safety aspects and other things, but there may be other components where you can introduce all those other elements. So that's something I think between Gary, you get that input. Certainly Steve he has the time to do that. But the next step was for us to get those formal documents and bid specifications so we can go out to bid for the parts of the project that need public bidding on.
And if I might say, paving was pulled out of this project. Paving is not part of the project going forward. That paving would come later out of a highway budget. So that could be discussed as permeable or gravel or whatnot.
For the access and the parking area, you mean?
What we're trying to get guidance on with a raise is to keep them moving forward. As council said, to get the bid documents, go through a bidding process, and this would be the installation for 4 bocce courts, 3 tennis courts / pickleball courts. And that's what this whole thing is about. Everything else would be an addition in cost, a different phase.
Well, did you get the impression from this board tonight that you have the go-ahead or not?
I'm a little confused.
I think we're in good shape. I think also the prior board, Mayor Irving, Nancy McGann, did a really good job getting us to where we're at. I think it's just time to put the kind of final touches or the next phase of touches. So maybe we should just touch base and figure out how we can make some of those more green additions a reality. But I think the structure that we have is pretty good. I just think that we want to, make a few tweaks to just make it more environmentally friendly.
That would be phase 2.
That would be phase 2.
So if we deal with phase 1 tonight, because that's just, do we want 3 courts, right? This is what we're talking about, Gary?
Yep.
We want 3 courts.
And 4 bocce.
And 4 bocces. I think that's what you're asking.
3 or whatever. How many?
That will allow the design to move forward.
Right. So I don't think we've really gotten into phase 2 yet. They're saying phase 1 is what they'd really like to hear from us. Do we want 3?
So why don't we just touch base with you later on, because I'm not sure we actually have a consensus about how many courts we want.
It's not.
If anybody's free tomorrow, we could get an appointment in the morning.
I mean, I think it's great. I'm generally flexible. To me, I think either or is perfectly fine. But I want to have consensus here among this board.
All right.
And Steve, you've done good work, and you've not diverted from anything that anyone has asked you to do. It's just we've come to you with additional questions which we didn't have. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve. So we'll move this along. We've got Chick Forrest again here.
Round 2.
Round 2.
So just,
Hi,
I guess
everybody.
Chick will introduce us, but we've done some sediment sampling from the bottom of or various parts of Lake Agawam. So as I said, we're all very excited to hear the results of the testing.
Good. So everyone's talking about Lake Agawam. We have been involved with the lake for many years. And I thought just from the context of sediment sampling and its relevance to the overall health of the lake, that it would be good to just give you an overview of some of the work that's been done, the reason why sediment testing is important. And that will just take a few minutes, and then I can present the detailed information that we have at this time. So hopefully that will be very informative. So there have been 3 primary reports regarding lake management. All of them are good. Many good ideas as well as new ideas coming out. The first one was done by my company in 2009. Most of it is on the village website. It was a full assessment of the lake, provided characterization, mapping, and very informative. It did have a number of recommendations, over 20 recommendations for improvements to the lake. And it was based on incremental improvements, and you'll kind of get a sense of why that's important as I go through the remaining reports and other information. That report is still valid. There really hasn't been a report that comprehensively looked at all of the factors contributing to pollution to the lake, and many of the reports that have been done since then have built on that. So, as I said, there were 22 recommendations that involved buffer areas, watershed area recommendations, lake management, water quality monitoring, and research. There's no one solution. I think that's a big takeaway. The second one was commissioned by the Peconic Gatekeeper, and Kevin spoke earlier, and Mr. Lombardo is here. It was prepared by Lombardo Associates in 2013. It addressed phosphorus as the primary water quality concern, as well as sediment concern. It provided an estimate of phosphorus inputs to the lake, and the benthic flux was found to be the highest, and that was based on reports from Dr. Gobler that were done before that. It also provided recommendations to reduce phosphorus in the lake to improve water quality and also to reduce algae blooms. Dr. Gobler did work in 2017. He found that nitrogen is the primary nutrient contributing to one species of the algae that's blooming in the lake. He quantified the nitrogen loading based on that. He recommended wastewater treatment for downtown. That was talked about briefly earlier by Kevin. And he also summarized the NP&V report recommendations, those that had been implemented and those that were still being implemented. So this was his budget for nitrogen in the lake, finding that wastewater, the first one was primarily the residential areas around the lake. The second one at 20% was the downtown area. So that totaled almost 50%. Sediment flux or sediment in the lake was contributing nitrogen at about 14%, and then other factors were less than that. But fertilizer is still a fairly high 8%, runoff at 4%, atmospheric deposition, and wildfowl. So these were the recommendations that Dr. Gobler summarized from our report that had been started or partially implemented. Gary has been doing a tremendous amount of increased stormwater retention in the streets of the village. That's item one. We did prepare an educational pamphlet. It's available, I believe, on the village website, and is very informative in terms of buffer planting around the lake. And again, Kevin mentioned that before. It's critical to intercept stormwater in higher elevation areas. That's being done and certainly can be done more extensively. Maintaining and getting sediment off the roads and out of the catch basins is critical so they continue to function. Sewering was recommended in the original report. There's been the study commissioned, and that provides you some guidance in that area. We looked at densities. There was a lot of information about, at the time, concerns about transfer of development rights under the Suffolk County Health Department's laws and regulations. We look to limit the transfer of development rights into the Lake Agawam watershed. Of course, pick up after your pet practices, use of aerators, which is being done, and monitoring, which is continued, as well as specifically harmful algal blooms and managing water quality risks. Those that had not been done, and you saw that waterfowl and wildfowl populations was a small percentage, trying to get homeowners to convert lawns to buffer areas. And I can say that that's partially done through the work of the Zoning Board of Appeals and wetlands permits that are issued. And there are many homes on the lake that have been improving buffers and reducing lawn. Placing shade trees near the shore, that will help to reduce, will help to keep temperatures down and will improve dissolved oxygen. It does have some effect in terms of accumulation of leaves in the lake, and that's kind of contributing to the organic sediments in the lake. But they also have tremendous advantages. Reduced hardened shorelines in favor of buffers. Maintenance of sanitary systems by homeowners. Many homeowners are installing innovative alternative systems as part of their wetlands permits around the lake. Of course, correcting malfunctioning systems. Native fish populations are very important. Carp in the lake tend to stir up the bottom and liberate nutrients. And so shifting that population is important, but that's not going to happen until water quality improves. Maintaining but not expanding native aquatic vegetation, and looking at wetland treatment for stormwater outfalls, as well as the potential to remove lake sediments, and that's really what we'll be talking about more. So to do that, further installation of IA systems is critical. Kevin has supported that all along. There's funding available, and that should be promoted in the strongest sense. Sewering, as we said, removal of sediments will have a benefit in terms of nitrogen and phosphorus. Fertilizer management can occur through wetlands permits, but also voluntary work by homeowners surrounding the lake. And then the lesser ones, green infrastructure, rain gardens, expanded detention areas, buffer areas will help with atmospheric deposition on the land. There's not much you can do about atmospheric deposition on the lake. And again, making conditions unfavorable to wildfowl will help. So sewering is being pursued. This is the potential district area, and you have recommendations on that. This is just a picture of an IA system. Those should be encouraged and are being installed. This is the homeowner's guide to vegetation and buffering that we prepared for the village that is still extremely useful and can be made available and is available. This is the second page of that. It folds up into a trifold. You've been hearing about additional measures. They've been mentioned in some of the reports, prior studies, use of permeable reactive barriers to intercept groundwater and treat for nitrogen. Installation of constructed treatment wetlands that can be done upland, in the lake. There are a variety of options. No detailed designs have been done at this time, but they have been looked at. And floating treatment wetlands may also be important going forward. So in terms of the sediment management, this is a little bit busy, but you can break it down to those 3 bullets. We were contracted by the village to look at the bathymetry of the northern part of the lake. So we wanted to kind of take a pilot area. So where Pond Lane bends, from there north to the end of the lake is the area that we looked at. And the idea was to determine the thickness of sediments. So we did hard bottom and soft bottom probes, and you'll see the results of that. We also did sediment sampling to screen the quality of sediments for potential disposal. So this is primarily what are we dealing with it with? Is it really bad? What's it going to cost to get rid of it? And you really need to do this sediment screening analysis in order to answer that. So we did look at the EPA test methods. It involved pesticides and herbicides, PCBs, VOCs, which are volatile organic compounds, semi-VOCs, mostly oils and greases, metals, total organic carbon, and a sieve analysis. And we compared the standards for disposal options. And then we are continuing to look at the feasibility for removal and disposal. It's very challenging, as you'll hear. So we took the hard and soft bottom sediment probes. The depth of sediment ranges from 0. There were many that hit nothing, just hit hard bottom right away. And we had a maximum of about 8.2 feet. Just mathematically, the average depth was 2.35 feet. That, you can't really compute the actual volume because it's deeper in places, but just mathematically, that's the average. We did contour maps, which you will see, and we determined the total volume of sediment in that study area to be about 65,000 cubic yards. This is the bathymetry, and I should have a pointer here, but I'll just explain. The left side is the soft bottom, the right side is the hard bottom, and the one on the right is an overlay of the two to show the difference. And it basically breaks down into color codes where the purple and blue areas are the thickest sediment. That's where you get as high as 8.2 feet. And then there are many areas of the lake that the sediment is much shallower. In terms of sampling, we did 4 samples. I will tell you that based on volume, the DEC would require more samples for sediment characterization for disposal. But we wanted to maintain a budget, really examine this from a feasibility standpoint, and determine what we have. So we've selected 4 locations in the northern part of the lake. We selected 2 locations at the southern part of the lake. So Station 1 to the north is going to be reflective of the 2 stormwater inputs in that part of the lake. And to the south, we had the 2 stations that one is near a shore. There's also a discharge there. It's actually a fairly minor discharge, and we've worked with the village on grant funding to address that. But we also looked in the center part of the lake at the south. We didn't do bathymetry. We didn't do the bottom contours there. So that basically gives us screening data to make some findings. So those findings, some good things. No VOCs were detected. No,
Just remind us, VOCs and...
that's volatile organic compounds. It's basically gasoline breakdown components. It includes benzene, xylene, toluene, and things like that. Semi-volatile organic compounds, the next one, are mostly oils, and none were detected.
Right.
There were some limited pesticides and herbicides detected, and metals, mostly arsenic and lead. And actually, the pesticides and herbicides were not excessive. So there were limited exceedances of what the DEC is asking us to look at, which is protection of groundwater, POG standards, in their Part 375 guidance values.
What would the arsenic and lead come from?
I would expect the lead from road runoff pretty extensively. Arsenic, we test farm fields all over the county. We test sediments all over the county. It's partially natural at low concentrations. It's elevated almost everywhere we test. So that could be a number of sources, but it could have been past farming, could be accumulated in the sediments. So it's again, hard to tell you exactly where it came from.
So just to summarize for everybody here, the limited exceedances of POG guidance, does that mean we have a little more flexibility as to where we can potentially put the sediment?
Potentially, yes. We are looking at disposal options. Believe it or not, even with trucking,
Right.
it's often less expensive to go off Long Island. And I find that hard to believe, but those are the way the numbers have been coming in. You've got local places that can take the material. You've also got possible, with this sediment, the way the numbers are coming out, possibilities for beneficial use determination to use that material somewhere else, whether it's in construction or alternative daily cover material for landfills. We are going through that now.
But this can't be used, Edwina, cover your ears, this can't be used in our park, right, our Moses Lane Park. That would, okay, just make that clear.
I would not. Cover your ears. And I will tell you that the sediment depth work that we are presenting tonight on those beautiful contour maps, we just collected the data last Thursday.
Right.
I can tell you that the lake was unfavorable to have
Right.
people on the lake during parts of the summer, so we pulled this together very quickly to present to you tonight. So the north part of the lake is most impacted with lead and arsenic. South and central parts are less impacted, although the middle of the lake to the south did have some elevated numbers. We're reviewing this now with DEC Materials Management to look at disposal options. We're also calling contacts that we use all the time to dispose of materials from cleanup sites and sanitary system pump outs and so forth. And we would recommend further sampling to delineate hotspots, because depending on where the material's going, you might be able to take a few more samples and save a lot of money in disposal. So those will be itemized and detailed in the recommendations. This is a little tough to read, but I can break it down. Those are the 6 locations in columns in the middle of that table. To the right are the Part 375 protection of groundwater guidelines, guidance values. No semis, no volatiles. A few of those pesticides, many are non-detect, the ND that you can see. It's probably a little bigger over in back of me. And we really just had that one hit that exceeded the protection of groundwater, and it's just over at 23.2 micrograms per kilogram at Station 6, which is in the middle of the lake on the south side. You can see the arsenic concentrations. These are not alarming. We find these all over Long Island, as I said, in farm fields, but they do exceed protection of groundwater. So we will need to look at that and break it down a little more. And really, as expected, and this goes to your question, Mr. Mayor, the 607 micrograms per kilogram of lead, that's in the station at the north end of the lake. So I really do see that as being related to runoff. So that presents the actual data summarized in a table. Of course, we have the full laboratory reports, and as I said, we'll be further reviewing this for disposal as well as coordinating with DEC. We did a sieve analysis as well. The graphs are just for sample station 1. It was a little bit, maybe not terribly surprising. You might think it's all very organic material. It's actually showing stormwater influence in terms of the sieve analysis as well. It's fine, but it's not as organic as I would have expected. So even Station 3, which is in the study area, just east of Pond Lane, showed medium sand and gravel with a trace of silt. All the other ones were medium sand with traces of silt. And so you can see the sieve analysis and how that broke down in terms of percentage. So that was interesting, but it kind of looks like stormwater to me with, almost the street sweepings. And that's one of the reasons why we strongly recommended, maintaining catch basins, getting sediment off the street. That will help. So we are examining. I'm not going to give you numbers tonight. I'm not going to give you the magic bullet on how we get rid of all this stuff. I am going to tell you that it is extremely challenging and it is extremely costly. This is a groundwater-fed lake. We don't have the luxury of being able to drain the lake as one option. We have done dredging projects to remove invasive species from lakes. They tend to be very expensive and difficult. We have one successful project, but again, it was very expensive. So that needs to be flushed out a little bit more. The biggest problem is the second bullet at the top, first and second, and that's dewatering the material. You either have to draw down the lake to dry it out. That's a huge groundwater pumping operation. Or you have to coffer areas, which is a huge construction project, to coffer areas and dewater them to get the material out. Or you just have to dredge it, which creates a big slurry of material, talking 65,000 cubic yards. If you suck that out hydraulically, it generates a huge amount of water. So we are looking at geotubes. We're looking at use of flocculants to settle the material out. If you have geotubes, you have to stage them in areas, and that takes up a lot of space. Sometimes you can stack them. They have to dry out, and you have to remove the material. So there are a lot of complexities to a project like this. We are looking at the industry for some assistance. I have very good contacts that we've worked with on other projects. We are also, I like the public setting here because we're very open. I think all ideas are good ideas when it comes to Lake Agawam, and just some of the closing remarks, I'll mention that. So that is all being looked at right now. We expect to complete the assessment and provide recommendations to the village. You should be prepared for a very large price tag and limited to questionable feasibility. That's not good news.
Very large price tag. What are we talking here?
Even at, you're talking, even at, we just got some prices in to remove it from the island and truck it. Just the disposal and transport is in the range of $51 a ton.
And how many tons did you say?
It's 65,000 cubic yards, so that has to be converted. But you could be in the $3 or $4 million range just for that part of it.
Okay.
Then you have to remove it, all the soft costs and everything else. So again, I don't want to go too far with those budgets because I'm hoping there may be some better news. But there's no question that it's challenging to do in terms of staging, finding the dewatering locations, or coming up with some alternate solution, and it is expensive.
What you or colleagues or any industry leaders could help us out with is getting this ready to go, because the New York State DEC grants are due middle of July, end of July, and there's still over $500 million available for projects like this, exactly for this. Yes. So if we're ready to go and have this prepared ahead of time, we can give the DEC heads up. And then we can get these grants in and hopefully be rewarded for the majority of these costs, if not, close to all of them. Plus we've got the Lake Agawam Conservancy, which we've helped form, which is here to help fund the matchable part of the grants. So there is money out there, and so if we can get the grants ready to go, maybe we can even begin this process as early as next year when that grant money comes in.
Yeah, we expect to continue with this rapidly. We've accomplished a lot. As I said, we just finished the soundings last week, so we will have that information.
Thank you.
And we did have a representative at the Conservancy meeting and the Planning Commission meeting a couple of weeks ago, so we've been able to kind of track what's happening there. And I also know their director, recent employee. So just in terms of progress and next steps, and you'll see the board over there, There have been tremendous accomplishments. Just as you said, the Conservancy, in my mind, is really important because that will help to educate homeowners around the lake, and there's a lot of things that can be done, and now you know the relative contributions of pollutants to the lake and how to help control them. The village is a big factor just in terms of the zoning board and your commitment to the lake, as well as funding. The town, of course, the town trustees are a critical partner in this, and they were at the first meeting when we determined that the sediment sampling was a necessary thing to pursue, and they will continue to be involved with this. And Stony Brook University, their involvement and their history with studying the lake is invaluable. So there's many minds and many perspectives, but there's one goal, and that's to heal the lake, to clean the lake. So I really feel that building consensus is very important. All the ideas are good ideas. This just shows you kind of a sampling of what's been happening, certainly the 2009 comprehensive plan, drainage installations by Gary's group, the lake plan that Mr. Lombardo did. The Gobler work is item D. The southeast area rain garden I mentioned before, but we have funding for, actually it's pending, for that bend in Gin Lane, and taking stormwater and diverting it in two ways, once as a pretreatment, second through rain gardens, and a third through a final detention area. And that will help stormwater in that area. I really do see a lot of incremental improvements as being necessary to clean the lake. I have not found a magic bullet. And I can go into as much detail as you want on the science and the nitrogen-phosphorus relationship and those things, because those are some of the things that are understood, but could be understood better. And actually, both are important. The southeast restoration area, village residents had come to the village to restore the area west of Gin Lane, that long stretch. And the Zoning Board of Appeals did issue a permit for that work. So that's pending some solution on the type of plantings to be installed. Item G, we're working on the dredging component and the sediment sampling. There's a rain garden on Pond Lane that was put in by the FHW group as part of their land use application. It handles a tremendous amount of stormwater that comes off the hillside. We worked on the design of that. We worked on the installation. Steve is here. His group, Aris Design, designed it, and it was, very nice. I won't call it a public-private partnership. It really was a private initiative that was encouraged by the Zoning Board of Appeals through their wetlands permits. Other item I is just homeowners coming to the village for permits to do work within the jurisdiction area. So you probably know in the law, Wayne and I sit with the Zoning Board of Appeals. There's a 125-foot setback that is regulated for landscaping, 150-foot setback for buildings, and 200 for sanitary systems. So all of that is looked at. Every project that comes in is an improvement. It's an improvement over the environmental conditions on that site that benefits the lake. That shouldn't be overlooked. I know that Rue Associates has been looking at lake treatment options, and some of the ones that I mentioned before, they have talked about in terms of floating wetland, constructed wetlands, and other constructed wetlands. And then, of course, there's a water lily removal project that will be pending soon that we've been tracking. So I know it's growing a little bit long. I'm happy to answer any questions. As I said, the next part, if you want to get into it, is more of the science, but I've been talking for quite a while.
Thank you. This was very helpful, really good, and generally good results. I mean, unfortunately, the financial aspect is the limiting factor here, but the sediment could have been a lot worse.
Yeah,
So,
and I'm encouraged to hear about funding sources because that's one big part of it. The other is just solving the construction and engineering part of it.
and thanks for you and your team going out in the lake in the middle of the summer. I know those are not ideal
We
conditions.
did get the
so-
sediment samples
All right,
then,
good.
but the soundings took a little longer. We had to wait for.
Oh, you made it back, so. With that said, I don't know if there's anything else. We can open this up to quick public comment here, if anyone has any questions. Quiet crowd tonight. Tom, I figured you'd have something on Lake Agawam, so you're welcome to come on up.
You have to come up.
To come up to the,
Yeah.
We just need to get you on the microphone so everybody who's listening could hear it at home.
Margot Horn. I just have a question. People have been saying, people have been fishing in the lake. Is it safe to eat those fish? No. What? No. No, it's not. No. Shouldn't there be a little sign or something saying no fishing?
There is.
We do have signs.
Do you have signs?
Yes.
Oh, well, then I guess I have to put my glasses on. Okay.
I would recommend Tackle Box instead.
Is it
New fish restaurant.
There's
right by the lake, but-
There's another question. What about dogs going down to the lake? Can they get
should not,
poisoned with any of that stuff?
absolutely
that's
do
in-
not take them near the lake. Maybe during the winter time, but during the algae blooms, you don't want
But
them near
not
the
now.
water. No. Chick could reinforce that if you'd like.
Yeah, that was one of the things in the scientific aspect. There are two primary algae in the lake. One does not fix nitrogen, and one fixes nitrogen. So microcystis is the one that is most harmful, and that's the one that's driven in large part by nitrogen. That floats on the top, and it will accumulate as wind blows that around the lake. So we have some innovative recommendations, and one of them is in other areas of the country. They harvest it. They actually skim the lake of that material during the day. I'd certainly want to look at the health aspects of it, but if it can be done in Minnesota, I don't see why it can't be done here. But that's the one that's harmful to pets. It also accumulates in the tissue of fish, so I definitely would not recommend eating the fish out of the lake.
Thank you. We've discussed actually skimming the lake of the algae and bacteria, or hydrovacing it with some AECOM trucks or things like that. That's something that we hope to do next summer. It's going to take a lot of work and some money, but that would be an ideal option and a temporary solution until we can really limit all of the nitrogen loading into our groundwater. Kevin?
Yes, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Chick, for the, there you are, presentation. I wanted to introduce a radical thought, and I'll qualify this by, I've worked on a lot of dredge projects, water quality permitting down in South Florida. I know this will not be easy, but it has been done in the past. There was a marina that was dredged on Dune Road on Shinnecock Basin, where the discharge was ocean. Ultimately, with the handling the sediments in geotextiles and trucking, that's an enormous cost. I would encourage the board to at least explore a radical concept of discharge in the dead of the winter offshore bathing corporation. Ultimately dredging in, again, with sediments as well as potential contaminants. It would require a speedies permit, which is a pollution discharge permit. It wouldn't be easy, but at the end, obviously the cost would be enormous, cost savings. And again, this is coming from someone that understands water quality, understands dredging, and it would be a short-term impact, but ultimately the benefits would be tremendous. And again, to check, George Hammerth would be the person at DEC. At least try to engage in this conversation to see if it can be explored. Again, it has been done before, and I can tell you with certainty the contaminants in that discharge over in Shinnecock, the VLCs, the smell of fuel was enormous, and they allowed it to happen. It's worth exploring again.
All right, thank you very much. And would you mind actually kind of putting that together for us so we can pass that along to
Sure.
Dr. Gobler and some of the rest of the team, as well as our water quality committee, because that sounds like something we'd like to explore.
and Kevin, you mentioned this to me this summer, and I did mention it to Mr. Lombardo. I don't think I mentioned it to you. I think I mentioned it to you, Jesse, but I was told there may be some hindrances with regards to permitting and a number of different jurisdictions out to the ocean, but we can look at it. I think it's a good idea.
Worth exploring.
It is.
Thank you. Does the board have any comments at this time? Okay.
Covered it all. Good study, Chick.
Thank you, Chick.
Thank you.
Excellent, really excellent work.
Thank you for jumping in the lake with a
Do you have a,
snorkel. And,
for the record, can I get a copy of that?
It's actually, Julie saved it to the laptop here.
Okay, so she can send it to me?
Yes.
Excellent.
We should just say one great thing about Gary. Gary added up all the basins that he has put in over, what, a 12-year period, Gary? And the number was 700, right? Yeah.
And counting.
Yep. Couple hundred in the last couple of years, so good job.
So she has it on
Great, thank you.
So we did just see Edwina and Tony come in. If you guys could hang for just a little bit, I want to get the public hearing going because I know a lot of our merchants and entrepreneurs did come to hear this, and we did a brief presentation on the Moses Lane Park. And Steve, I don't know if you can hang for a little bit longer. If not, we understand. But I would like to quickly move to the public hearing and then go back to the Moses Lane Park. Okay, don't worry about it. We can have a discussion internally as well and pass that along to you, and you can watch it on Charlie's video. So thank you very much. Is that okay, guys? Can we just quickly move to the local law? I just want to make sure that we can get some of our merchants home. I'm sorry. Okay, thank you. So with that said, a couple of quick things. I want to reopen the public hearing for the vacant buildings and storefronts. I also just want to make a quick introduction. We had Alexander Halsey Storch come in here. We recently appointed her to be our assistant village attorney, and she is likely our first female attorney in Southampton Village history, definitely the youngest, and we're very excited to have her on board. She was very helpful in having us pull up some village law from East Hampton, which we'll discuss tonight, because I think that's instrumental in what we are looking to do here, and there's some guidelines that we have available. So with that said, I wanted to make a motion to reopen the local law for vacant buildings and storefronts.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
So Wayne, I don't know if you want to take it from here.
Okay, so at the last meeting, you did open a public hearing. This was a if the board recalls, one of the elements or issues in the village is our vacant storefronts, and there's a number of factors that the board has been investigating, prior board and this board, as to what causes all the vacancies that we've been experiencing. But one of the things that was recognized is the aesthetics of the storefronts as they are vacant. And so Trustee Parrish reviewed this with our office, and we put together a compilation of various statutes that are already in place in many municipalities, and put together a law which we thought would apply to the village. We take no pride of authorship. I think the intent of the board is to start the discussion and get as much input, but essentially the law recognizes that certain aesthetics, when the storefronts are vacant, it could create a unsightly or unsafe or have a negative impact on the character of our business district. And so the code would provide that if a storefront was vacant for more than 30 days, it has to provide a window screening or a window display. We have some broad guidelines as to what those are, but the window display could include artwork, it could include contemporary or historical images of the village or other works of art, or even information on public events. So we've provided some guidelines. I think the intent and what came up at the last meeting is the board would want to expand on that and provide some sort of handbook or otherwise for our merchants, to give them the most flexibility in providing that, but also some guidelines how to achieve that. What was recognized by the board, this is just one element of dealing with the vacancy, and they were looking to get input from our merchants and our community as to not only this, any other aspects that would help us deal with the issue of vacant storefronts. So.
All right, thank you. So I want to encourage all the merchants here. We've got a packet here with some window guidelines. Again, this is from East Hampton. This is what Mayor Rickenbach and his board put together. It's actually very well done. So I'm also inclined, obviously I want to get the input of the merchants, but almost to kind of scrap kind of what we have, which is a bit wordy and might even be confusing, and simply go with a one-page law that East Hampton has and then combine that with the illustrated guidelines, which are very easy for our merchants to understand. So we could also display that. So if anyone wants to grab it, it's right up here. But I can read this. But with that being said, I'd love to get some comments from our merchants if anyone is willing to step up.
I'm just curious as to what some of the options are. I mean, I like the idea of maybe what the attorney had said.
To come up to the, you have to come up.
Yes, please.
It is.
Thank you.
And this is the East Hampton Code. It's very similar to kind of what we have, but this is more of an illustrated guideline.
My name is Kelly Kirkpatrick. I own Therapy Life and Style across the street. I was interested in just knowing what some of the options are. I mean, obviously, right now, for rent signs aren't very aesthetically pleasing, but I do like the idea of showing what some of the things are that are going on in town, because as we all know, we had a Southampton Fest this weekend. I don't know how your guys' stores did. Saturday was busy. Sunday was one of the slowest days that I've had all year. I don't know if maybe a lot of people that were coming into the store didn't even know that we were having a festival. So the idea of maybe putting these things on the windows, I think could possibly be a good idea. Even the what was going on at the art center, the silent disco, another customer told me about it. I had no idea. So, I mean, maybe that's because I didn't go and look to find out, but I think other people that are just coming out for the weekend may have a hard time finding out what's going on in the town. I think that's a very good idea. I don't know what the other options are, but anything is probably better than a blank storefront with dark windows and a Morley sign. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, if you look at the, I guess what East Hampton put together, they had a sign here. I guess we can zoom in here. This is what you would be able to do if you have a vacancy, and on the bottom left-hand corner, you can put your sign according to a certain size, and then they also provide specific look and feel of what something should look like. So you can see here. Again, maybe Charlie, you can zoom in on one that says open May 1st, but this one says, open May 1st right here. So this is very detailed and laid out. This was done in 2010 in East Hampton Village, and it's worked pretty well. East Hampton is very well known for having very clean storefronts, and obviously we have a different vacancy issue that they have, but it's definitely helped keep their village looking very clean. So again, I thank you very much, Kelly, for coming up here. We'd love to hear more, so if there's anyone else that would like to just give some comments as to whether they like this or don't like this, we want as much input as possible before we make our decisions. Thank you.
Hello, Caroline Kenlon from 1708 House. As a bed and breakfast, it's extremely important to have something going on in the village. Empty storefronts definitely do not help our guests who come to visit Southampton. Something, would be great to even have stores open late after dinner hour so that they could do something after having dinner and spending a weekend out here. Or so I think this is a great idea. I think this is definitely a move in the right direction, and hopefully it'll open the opportunity for people to have tenants and have new shops and maybe even more restaurants. And maybe a restaurant or a bar on Lake Agawam. Everyone always asks, where is there a place to eat or drink on the water?
We'd love that, which is why obviously we're pushing for a sewer system, because we have a temporary limit on how many restaurants we could have through the health department. But once we can put something like that in place and or use new septic systems and new technology, we can open new restaurants. And Trustee Allen has been working on some type of method where you can kind of aggregate wet use permits and buy them or shift them around. And so we're looking into that too. But yes, fingers crossed, because that could be very helpful to reshape the way our village looks. So one small step at a time. This is not going to fix our vacancy problem, but at least it will make our village look better, in my opinion. So again, we'd love to hear more feedback. Even if you're against it, we want to hear it. Please come on up. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Morley Quattrochi. I have the Morley sign in the window of a lot of stores.
Nothing against you.
Part of my job is to put that sign in the window so the store gets rented, so it's not vacant. So I think, however, that being said, I think this is a great thing that you're trying to do, and I think there needs to be some modifying of what I read in the proposed law today. I think there has to be, I don't think 100% of the window being covered is the best thing. I think if you have a storefront window and you have a glass door, I think the door should be papered. I'm in favor of a small sign in the right-hand or left-hand corner of the store. I think it's great. I don't need to have a big, huge sign out there. But I can tell you that most of my phone calls, I'm on all the websites that you need to be on for commercial real estate, but most of my phone calls come from signage and people walking and people peering in the window and looking in at the store and saying, gee, this looks like the place that's right for me. So I think there needs to be a balance between the regulation for papering the window and also for allowing a landlord to rent his store as well.
Morley, thank you for coming up here. Sorry, but I'm going to say, could you give us some guidance as to, in my opinion, no signage is going to help when the landlord's saying no. So what do we do then? Because I know I would imagine you have some landlords that just simply do not want to rent or want to charge way too much. What do we do?
This is still America. It's still a capitalist country. Some guys, you just can't, I know you've been focusing on the courtyard.
Right.
I said, but you have not said a word about the white elephant that is the corner of Hill Street and Windmill Lane. That building
we'll get started. Don't worry.
That building has been vacant for 20 years.
Right.
20 years.
20 years. So, but yeah, there are landlords. I can't think of a landlord that doesn't want to rent his building.
I can think of two in Southampton alone.
Well, I think your opinion might differ from mine.
Okay.
Because I know both of those landlords.
They just haven't found the right fit for that.
Haven't found the right
very
fit.
Specific and they're
Right.
waiting for certain
But I can tell you that
legislation.
things are going to happen this year. Things are going to adjust. You're going to see more for rent signs, and then landlords will adjust their thinking as to rents. And we're going to see a worse year than we saw this past year, in my prediction. And then we're going to eventually move out of it. So
Why does East Hampton have minimal to no vacancies?
I don't do a lot of business in East Hampton, so I can't answer that question.
But you actually you just pointed out a cyclical with that statement you just said. So again, what brought that on, and what you made some predictions. What are you basing those on, and elaborate on that if you may.
My response to anybody saying to me, why are there so many signs in the window? And I look at everybody in the eye and say, what were your last 5 purchases? Were they all online? And people sheepishly just look down and say, yeah, right, Amazon, Josh and Main, Wayfair, you name it. So our thinking, everyone's thinking around the world is different than it was years ago. But what will happen is rents will come down. People will, with good ideas, will open stores, and maybe even the national tenants will start to come back. So it's your guess is as good as mine as what will return it.
But you cannot, please.
Kelly, you can come on up if you don't mind.
Come up.
But one thing too.
Yeah, you can come on up.
But one thing more than what you just spoke to was.
Oh, I'm not finished yet, though. I really don't want to have a
But
debate.
also to elaborate on it, Brooks Brothers was a
sit
good
down for a
example.
minute? Thank you.
Brooks Brothers was an example where they had a store, they left, and they came back and downsized. That seems to be
Right.
a lot of what's happening.
Right.
Kind of what you just said.
Yeah. So anyway, specifics in this, you really have to take into account different types of stores. If you have one window and one door, that's one thing. That's very easy to paper. If you've got a store like 46 Job's Lane, there's an art gallery in there now that has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 windows, 2 glass doors, mullions on the windows. That's where you need to fine-tune the legislation so that you don't kill a landlord over a store that's oddly shaped.
My question for you, though, is, and again, you read kind of the draft that we kind of pulled from other places, but then
Yes.
today we pulled East Hampton. Why does East Hampton's laws, why do they not work here?
I don't know, I don't even know East Hampton's law.
I mean, you
So,
can
I'll-
grab a packet if you'd like.
I'll take a look at it, but I'm sure it can work here. For the landlords I represent, where they give me the ability to do the leasing, I'll do it tomorrow. I'll paper these windows tomorrow because I think it's a great idea. For some of the landlords I don't have control over, some will fight you and some won't. Some will comply.
And the second thing I would just respond, just in general, in East Hampton, for example, they had businesses open up like Warby Parker. Warby Parker is a phenomenal, up-and-coming, direct-to-consumer, almost online-only company, and they want, in East Hampton, they want a physical brick-and-mortar store. We want them to come here also. Tesla had opened up in East Hampton. We want them to come here, but ultimately, maybe the first step in that is just cleaning up our storefronts and making sure we have similar laws to East Hampton and other villages around the country that might protect our village and our historical district, to the fullest extent.
But he's agreeing that this is a good idea. I think what you're saying is if it's an oddly shaped building and it has many, many glass fronts, that we have a little bit of flexibility in terms of not papering everything up. And the other thing you had mentioned to me in an earlier conversation is that you would like to have the lease sign include a footprint of the blueprint of the layout, if possible.
Well,
Is that
sure.
still-
That would be great to have the sign or the layout of the store. If you're going to paper the entire window, at least you have a layout of the store so the person could get a feel for what that store looks like inside.
But we should steal shamelessly from East Hampton if things are working there, absolutely.
Absolutely.
But I will say two things, and I know you're standing up.
No. Honestly, what I was going to say it was directed to him, not his specific thing, so I don't think.
And we should talk after the
Kelly,
meeting.
would you mind coming up just to
Okay.
be on the mic? Sorry.
Yes. But we know you represent many of the landlords in the village, and we appreciate you coming tonight. Thank you. And
Thanks.
if you
I'm
have,
sorry to give you a hard time, but I just, I got to look out for the merchants here.
I'm sort of
in the
used to
room.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay,
But he's
thank you.
also, he's a good
yeah,
source.
good source of information.
He just said as a barometer, he just pointed out things move in cycles, and we've had a trend upward of very expensive rents, meaning people taking advantage of a business cycle, which you're saying will soon reverse, or you predict. Those are business cycles.
I don't think those cycles will ever reverse as long as we have 2 or 3 landlords that just don't want to rent.
I
know
that's
that
not
they
going
don't
to change
want to
them.
rent.
No, that's not going to change them. You're absolutely
Well,
right.
one of the landlords you've had a battle with actually put an art gallery next to Gildor in another building he owns, free of charge, for an 8-week period. It was a charity event. So, you really should get to know these people before you throw them under the bus.
I had lunch with him, and he stated
We're talking
everything.
about storefront windows, or what are we doing here? We're getting off on a tangent. Let's get back to this proposed. That's probably a good thing to sort of focus
Mark, you're right. I
Well said.
apologize.
It is.
Thank you.
Well said, Justin.
Thank
It
you.
is. We're really trying to get this going.
Yeah.
I mean, basically, this is going to...
Yeah, 'cause we're-
there's been
yeah,
a
that's
lot
right.
of good feedback from building owners that I've talked to that are really
Right.
excited about this, and they're willing to jump on it ASAP.
Right.
So-
I mean,
As you said, it's not going to solve vacancies. We
Right.
already agreed that. It's
Right.
just to
We're
make it
looking
look
get
more
the
aesthetic.
optics better, which is a start, like you said, to gain traction and get people involved. I think a lot of people here came up to it's a great idea. So let's go with our great idea that we've gotten going on. And you've got East Hampton as a model. Let's do that. We can be very broad, too. We have a lot of great Mary Godfrey. We have the Historical Museum. We have the Art Center, who you were great championing that one. Let's start taking advantage of that and getting on this today.
And this would, though, apply to, obviously, the landlord who did destroy his property.
Sure.
And so he would have to follow this law.
Absolutely.
And so that's why we're talking about, I believe,
And wouldn't that
he's
be
a client,
unbelievable
so-
if he said he was going to do it?
I mean, I would...
That'd be fantastic.
It's not a choice,
but-
according to East Hampton law.
Well, might
So
not be
if
a
I
choice
may
here. We have
just
to work on this.
add a comment to the courtyard. In the legislation, and I have a question for our counselor to that regard, I think we should clarify that the right-of-way view can be in a courtyard, because we don't specify that. And we have many, many courtyards and alleyways in the village, right? So if you're standing somewhere on the courtyard at Job's Lane, on the courtyard by the, you can see the Plaza Cafe through that courtyard there, all of those stores, if you can see it from the public right-of-way, will be subject to this.
Is it frontage that we're talking
Yeah.
about, or is it?
Well, that was what I
So
wanted
that's
to
the thing we have to
clarify.
think about.
Well, if you
We're
look,
gonna sit
if
there
I
and get,
may,
like, an angle?
the definition of a
Yeah.
storefront window says any window that permits an unobstructed public view into the interior of the building or premises from any immediately adjacent street, sidewalk, or right-of-way.
Which
So it
would
would
include it,
include
right.
those kind of elements.
But I think we should specify it can look into a courtyard, because a lot of people might not think it applies to them. I know I'm being
does.
picky, but since the word
Says that.
courtyard has been out there, right? We might as well
Kimberly,
make
it
it
says
clear.
that.
Sidewalk or right-of-way, so.
It says courtyard?
It says that. Wayne, explain that again, please.
Sidewalk or right
It
of
says
way.
any immediately adjacent street, sidewalk, or right-of-way. So that, I mean, if you want, that's language, we can clarify that. I believe it's already covered, but
Doesn't say courtyard per se, but it's a sidewalk or an access.
I would appreciate it being clarified, because this topic of courtyard has been bandied about a lot. Thank you. So,
Any other comment here? Kelly? Sure. We take it you like this proposal, though?
I do.
And now you got to come up.
Sorry, Kelly.
I
We
do.
don't get as much
So
feedback as you
the
can,
only
yeah.
thing that I would like to know is, like Mark said, so where do we go from here? Like, I sometimes feel like some of these meetings, like you discuss everything, but so what is the next step? That's my only concern. And I understand what Morley's saying. If I was the real estate broker, I 100% would want my name there. What about just not doing the door so that you can see? Because as a retailer, and like you, Jesse, sometimes if I go to look at a space, nobody's there, I would like to peek in to see what the space looks like. I have no problem with the door not being. I think we're just all very worried about the darkness. It's going to get dark soon.
Dark boxes we want to
Yeah,
avoid.
it's going to get dark. It's going to be dark at 5 o'clock, and you're going to drive down Job's Lane, and it's going to look like a ghost town. So I don't know, can things get backlit? I'm just asking, so where do we, what is the next step in this whole process?
Your input is the next step.
Okay.
So
And it
that's
dep-
why
and it
we
depends.
have this open, so we can start getting ideas, because we can go to East Hampton, like right here. This is an example. What Morley was saying, if you do a border, there is a art gallery on Job's Lane, a little bit to the, let me see which way am I going, west of the courtyard. They have a beautiful round, Julie, we took a walk down a piece of, it's gorgeous. It doesn't cover the whole thing, but it brings your eye right to it.
Are you talking about 46?
It could be, I don't know.
That was my old store. I know
Okay, so
it.
yes,
So,
it's
yeah.
gorgeous, but it doesn't cover the whole thing.
No, and you can 100%
Exactly, and I
see
think that's
inside
the
of it.
point. We want it to make it work for the people who want their stores rented, but we also want the village and its community and its residents to be able to walk through at 6 o'clock and be not frightened by what is behind that darkness.
Right.
So I think this is what we're trying to accomplish tonight. So you had some very good comments right there. And I'm hoping that everybody else could give us that, because we can work with communities from all across the country. We're a pretty unique community. We do have a similar community to East Hampton, but we also have some historic things that we could put in there too, that Jesse has reached out to the Art Center, the Historical Museum. So that's what we want to really
I mean, there
work
are other
with.
avenues
There's
too.
tons of avenues.
The high school, they have an art
Exactly.
program. I'm
Right,
sure
right.
some of these kids would be thrilled to see their artwork, and their parents would be, and maybe those parents would actually come to town to look at their kids' artwork and maybe go into one of our stores.
That's what we want.
So
Ideas
that's
like that, they're going to enable us to start this momentum.
Right.
So this is a step. If we get this and we get people coming into town because they want to see some things,
Yeah.
and that builds upon the other things that we are going to be working on for the future. But this is a way to get something going.
And to answer your question about the process, really, is one of the things, this is the process. We have a law that our counselor has drafted up, and Mark and everybody's worked here on it. We have an example with East Hampton. It's called the public hearing process, which is you're the public.
Right.
And we're hearing. So that, and then once we've heard, so we encourage everybody, that's why the mayor's saying, anybody else, and he's trying to draw you out. And
The thing is, I will tell you, I feel like a lot of people may have not known about it. The
Well,
only
this will
reason
stay
why
open.
I
This will
knew.
stay open. We
Okay,
announce it,
is
and
because
it's
I got an email yesterday from
Chamber.
the Chamber chamber
And this will
at
spread, and
6
that's-
o'clock last night. I don't think a lot of other people
No,
did.
they know, but not everybody will. That's why we do this a couple times.
Right, okay.
And that's why this will spread word of mouth. Hopefully more people come up, we'll get input, and then we will pass a law that will incorporate all the suggestions.
Okay,
And then we'll work on communication.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you, Kelly.
I had a question, if you know how East Hampton handles the approval process, because in our law, it's asking that the village building department be available for suggestions and resource assistance.
What East Hampton did in these guidelines is if you follow, you don't need any approval whatsoever. All you need to do is follow these guidelines. So you can just do it without any approval. You just literally need to follow this.
And that is
So
basically,
then if they don't
Less
comply-
government, actually.
That's all. Then-
by
So they don't
this.
comply, then.
and that is really what we spoke about the last meeting. We decided that we would probably have some type of booklet.
Yeah, we did.
Right, so we are going on there, Jesse happened to pull this up, which is a great way to do it. So we will develop that. But we're just really looking for input from the people that came here that say, look, point us. Kelly pointed us in two different great directions.
So the
thank you.
difference, sorry, Mark, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
It's okay.
But I guess the difference, which you're pointing out, Jesse and Mark, is we're not giving anybody a nod. We're giving people flexibility and guidelines, and that's all they have to do. Okay.
Exactly.
So then I'm misreading some of this, because this is a little bit more, we give direction, we give a nod, and we're pulling away from that. With that, I'm in agreement.
It doesn't say that.
Yeah.
Well, it does, because
Could we
it's
maybe put
saying-
this on the screen, because this is the East Hampton, it's one paragraph. And our law is 1, 2, 3, 4.
This is an abstract of their law. When they passed the law,
Right.
it had all of the preamble and all of the things that.
Yeah, sure, if you don't mind.
In fact, they
Here, that doesn't,
Yeah,
that
because then I'm
doesn't
getting into all the other things, the violations and how that
The
works out.
code looks
So
more
does that say
like
about
this.
violations of
Yes.
this?
Right,
Yes, that's all the
Okay.
legalese
We got there,
thank
that we have lawyers for.
right. Thank you.
Right, Counselor? And then that is, again, the summary of it.
What is that?
people-
There it is.
I guess that's a summary of the East Hampton law.
Julie? Perfect. Julie, can you? Wayne?
See, but I would not want to go full length. I think it could be, is that what they're saying there? No, maintain and explain everything. Okay, grant level, sorry.
So I think we're moving in the right direction. Feel free to tell everybody, we'll likely, I think it's a good idea to keep this
it open,
open.
absolutely.
And then we can get some more comment, and we could spread the word. We have more than 2 weeks for the next meeting. And then hopefully at that point, we could put this into law. And by the time, Thanksgiving rolls around, when we have a lot of visitors, our village hopefully will look a little better for the merchants that do stay open every day. And I think it would add a nice touch to our village downtown.
I think you're going to see a lot of good collaboration between building owners in this, because they're going to be pumped up about it, I think. Well, that's what I've gotten from on the street already. So, anybody else?
All right. With that said, we can make a motion to adjourn this public hearing
To the October 10th?
to October 10th.
Second? All in favor?
So the next public hearing goes back to our discussion regarding repealing regulations on surfing. So I would like to make a motion to open the hearing.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Counselor?
So, in August, the board question arose as to a section of the village code. It was adopted in the early 70s that basically prohibited surfing or the use of a surfboard in the portions of the village lying between Halsey Neck Lane and Old Town Road during the month from June 15th to September 15th from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. And it had a provision except for designated areas that the Board of Trustees have designated for surfing. This issue arose with some of the concerns or complaints that were arising from the surf schools operating and the complaints that were arising from that. And it was brought to the village board's attention of this provision of the law. So back in August, you actually adopted a resolution designating practically most of the village in that area for surfing, except for the portions of Cooper's Beach. The other thing the board did was establish an advisory committee that you appointed people at the last meeting, in which case they're going to re-examine and provide this board with advice on the implementation of surf schools. And then the third element was a proposed law to repeal that section in its entirety from the section of the village code, in which case, if you did that, then there would be no prohibition at surfing at all. What we could ascertain back in the 70s, the concern back then was, and I think surfing was at a different level and understanding, was that the surfing would not be safe to swimmers, and that the purpose of why it was adopted was the conflict between surfers and swimming. And so that was why the ban was in those areas, which are swimming areas. Throughout time, and we were able to ascertain the village board had adopted resolutions designating certain surf spots because the surf community came in and advised the board that there were specific areas where the breaks were happening. I recall in the 80s there was a place just to the right of Little Plains Road, which was a significant break at the time, and that was designated by the village board. I also recall times when the village police would be out monitoring the beach and telling surfers to come out, and of course that confrontation has occurred throughout the decades. This public hearing is proposed for the board to consider and hear public comment as to whether you should repeal that entire section or restriction on surfing, and if you do so, then there would be no restriction on surfing whatsoever, even at Cooper's Beach, although you know once you have lifeguards there, they are in charge and can direct what happens within the designated swim areas. On the rest of the beaches, you wouldn't necessarily have that, although you do have a couple private clubs that have their own lifeguards and can control that. So I know the board talked about, number one, repealing it in its entirety, modifying it so that you could designate perhaps some other areas, such as Cooper's, as always a designated swim area or not. But the proposal you have in front of you is to repeal it in its entirety and doesn't have any provision of designating or excluding surfing from any particular areas. That's all I have to say.
May I ask a question? Could a village board pass a resolution for a particular year prohibiting, or would it have to be by local law?
Under the current code, you could, by resolution, whether it be by year, by month, by week, you could designate certain areas. What has happened in the experience is that from year to year, everybody sort of, in board to board, people forget that this law is in place and that there are these issues, and more in particular, the surf changes from year to year. So, and only when these confrontations occur, in some instances, because there's a conflict, whether it be swimmers or whatnot. In this case, I think it arose because of the surf camps taking over certain surf spots, and it became known that if there couldn't be a resolution of those issues, then, and this was surfer to surfer arguing about who can occupy the space, and it was identified by our police department that, this section, if it couldn't be resolved, this section could apply to everybody. if it couldn't be resolved. So, and that's what I believe prompted the whole discussion about this section of the code. So if you left it the way it is, just to your point, the village board could, on an annual basis or monthly basis, if they so chose, designate certain areas. The problem with that is obviously letting the public know how and where and how do you designate, and that's sort of the issue that we have. There's no signage saying, I don't think, there may be in certain places, there's signage that's saying no surfboarding within certain areas during certain months, but for the most part is always having the public be aware of how and where you do that. So that's sort of the balancing that you have here.
Wayne?
Go on.
So, Kimberly, where you've talked to quite a bit of moms, you've said that.
Yeah.
So where are you feeling on this? Like Rich, you've also talked, I just want to touch base with Rich and both of you. You've talked about, do we have to repeal this in the past, or can we just amend it? You know, so is repealing going to be the answer, or do we amend it to say, okay, look, we can make X, Y, and Z bathing beaches?
I have an opinion and answer to that. I'll let Kimberly speak.
Kimberly, please.
Yeah, so the mothers who've come to me who have 4- and 6-year-olds who they hope someday will become surfers, but right now are not, say, we don't just want to go to Cooper's. We want to be able to use the bathing beach that's, you know, closest to where they live. And some people have pointed out that in other villages and states, people designate beaches for surfers and beaches for bathing swimmers only. And that was their only comment. So, of course, they're not here because it's not swim season at the moment, but that's the feedback I've received from a number of families in the community. Not that they don't want to share the ocean. They're all open to sharing the ocean. They just don't want to be in a situation where a surfboarder accidentally hits one of their children. Not that that would happen, but they're just trying to be safe. That's all. So. And I think what you're saying is this code would allow another area to be designated as a bathing-only beach or a surfing open beach. I guess it's saying everybody can surf anywhere.
Well, if you repeal this, then you can surf everywhere.
Yeah, no, that's the one part.
If you leave it the way it is, the board, by mere resolution, without local law, just as you did in August, can designate certain areas or not.
We can tweak it. We can move it as we go along.
Or you could try to modify this in such a way, still give you that flexibility, which is embedded in the code right now, to change things, but you may want to identify maybe on a more permanent basis, such as you don't want it to happen at Cooper's, clearly. That may be something you do, or you may designate some other things. But I think the key, though, is we've heard from the surf community, and I'm surprised they're not here, but if you looked at the ocean today in the past couple of days, I know where everybody is. So the point of it is that the waves happen in different places, different locations, and that can shift month to month, year to year, and so on. So it's unless you're going to have somebody that's charged with this in the village hall, the surf beach warden or whatever that's charged with this, to be able to identify this and come to the board and say, here's what the issues are, here's what we need to do, and go out and adopt the resolution and make sure the signage is there so everybody knows this is the surf area, this is the bathing area. It's going to be hard to apply and enforce. And that's sort of the dilemma. So I look back at what the law was, and they tried to provide that flexibility. But in reality is unless somebody's here monitoring and telling the board, and boards change from year to year or month to month or whatever, that you end up with something that people forget about and it doesn't get enforced properly. And then when it is attempted to be enforced, everybody is like, why now? And, so.
Well, that's why you educate them at the timeline. So to answer your question, Mark, this clearly is not a new conflict. The fact that the law was put in the 70s, the only thing that's changed is the faces on this respective board through the decades. So it's not a new conflict. There's nothing unique about it. And it'll never go away because we have a finite amount of space that wants to be used and by more and more people every year. So when I look at any type of law that's on the books, or certainly to adding one or tweaking it, I like to look at the history of it. Why was there in the first place? It was something, you have to find out why it was implemented in the first place, and clearly there were some conflicts, there were some issues. So where we go forward, I like the fact that we now have this advisory committee that will, which is supposed to be, if I'm correct, comprised of surfers, beachgoers, and homeowners, because it's not just the surfer. You have, from my experience, is surfer versus surfer, surfer versus bather, and all three of them are certainly versus a homeowner, because of course they have
Rich,
their...
I just want to interrupt because you reminded me, this law also deals with surf casting.
Yeah,
So there's also those conflicts with surf casters and surfers and swimmers.
Yes, and that's,
So
you
that's
gotta,
part of this law as well.
yeah, so to answer your question, whether repeal or not, it was put in place for a reason. If we just addressed it on a kind of need to change basis, a case-by-case basis, just a couple months ago. So, the board always has a flexibility to do that, and we did, and we acted very swiftly, as a matter of fact. So, again, I'm interested to hear the input from both the public, which, again, it's not the swimming season, so the place is empty on that, but hopefully this will get out and we'll get some feedback from surfers.
But
We do have some
Well,
public
I'm sorry,
comment.
okay, but, yeah, so...
Yeah, come on up. Hi. You just got to go to the microphone, Haley.
My name's Haley McGowan. I know some of you. This was like a big hullabaloo when the whole thing went down, and so I had a bunch of moms contact me. I had a bunch of surfers ask me questions. I think the biggest problem is the law and the way it's written, and I think that it's ambiguous, and I think that enforcing as needed or giving people the ability to possibly enforce it at one time and not at another time opens it up to some really serious exploitation by people that have maybe not so wholesome motivations, such as some of the property owners. I think that was a lot of people's concern at the outset of the conflict that happened. I think we have the police officers patrolling the beach on a regular basis throughout the summer. I feel if somebody's genuinely disturbing the peace or creating a hazard or harm to somebody, they can be, dealt with either in that way. I also think that there's a possibility to lay some responsibility on the surfing schools. I've heard that a lot of the big problems comes from novice surfers who aren't aware of the code and the etiquette and the safety and different things like that. And so I think that there's a potential to shift some responsibility there. But I think the code as it's written now is a freaking backdoor to a lot of nefarious things that we don't want to see happen as far as people having access to that beach.
So then a repeal of it, so void of any law,
I think
would just exacerbate that, because then you just have the Wild West, because there's nothing to enforce. No, because the police, the reason they can enforce it is because there is a law in the book to enforce. If a law doesn't exist, they cannot enforce anything.
Right, but if you're only enforcing a law at your leisure,
it's not at their leisure. It's important. It's being nice to the public. Really. I know it's not at their leisure.
I do think it's very important to understand a situation that occurred, and the chief can fill in some details. It was an anomaly. So here's what happened. We had on normal patrol a complaint made to a police officer about some alleged transaction that was taking place. So there was no, at that particular beach, no commercial enterprise was permitted. Upon investigation, the police officer was unable to ascertain that it was happening. There was some give and take. Essentially, the police officer said to an individual, understand that the law states that technically there is no surfing at all. An individual, and I don't know, decided that we're going to pop this on social media and make it whoof, when in fact it wasn't the police department going from beach to beach saying, today's the day we're going to enforce the law. They got a specific complaint. The police, when they get a specific complaint, must answer the call. Mm-hmm. And they were dealing with one call about one incident and that's how social media works, and it's fine, turned into this, I'll use your word, hullabaloo, mm-hmm. Not based upon an interaction between a police officer and a particular surfer. So I think that needs to be a little bit clear, too.
Well, then...
Thank you, because that really was the center of it. It just doesn't happen often. It was an isolated incident.
I think the surfing community polices themselves beautifully. I think they do a great job.
Yes.
I think that they're really, I think they're some of the best beachgoers we have. Right. I think they take great stewardship in the beach.
Absolutely.
That's why I think they should have a little more, I don't think they need to be specifically noted as with surf casters and things like that, I'm a big surf caster myself. My husband is, we just taught my son how to surf this summer. Like, I just want to make sure that these things are like untouchable. So either we tighten it up and we make it better, or we get rid of it, because one of the two things has to happen.
Absolutely right.
So
That's why we make the big bucks, to help try to figure that out with public input. That's exactly what you said. What the hell direction do we go? And that's why this is a public hearing, to ascertain that. Because it's one way or the other.
Right.
It is. And there's always conflict, so this is exactly, and I'm glad thank you for stepping up and saying that, because that's exactly why we're having this dialogue.
Having a law on the books allows us to create and designate where surfing can happen. And I think that, as it was stated, the sandbars shift summer to summer. And so for us to be able to say, okay, well, it's at Kreider this year, it's at Little Plains, it's at the picnic area, and all of that, it gives us the flexibility. Because if there's no law, then anyone can go anywhere. And including Coopers, which we know we don't want because of the bathers.
That won't happen.
It won't, I know, but still, I guarantee when there is a surf bar at Coopers, there will be people in the water at 5 a.m. and at 7 p.m. after the lifeguards are gone.
And that's fine.
And right,
and
but that exactly. So, but there may be people that then the novices come and say, oh, well, I see the surfers there then and early, because that's when the break is, and they'll try and go during the day. So it's just, again, it causes a shift. Now, in the 70s, surfing was not as mainstream as it is today. And I think that's where a lot of the conflict occurred between the individuals. So it's much more mainstream today. A lot more people do it. And think it's one of...
we have a lot more bathers in the water,
and we have a lot more bathers in the water, and people...
exponentially increasing.
Exactly. So, if you look at, take a winter sport like skiing, there are different types of slopes. Could there be different types of beaches with different types of break for different types of levels of surfers, different types of schools?
Right, which I'm saying
again,
is, like, you can't legislate, like,
you
how
can't legislate that.
Utilized. Like,
but again, hopefully with the surfing, committee, the surf advisory committee, again, getting the surfers to self-regulate themselves and self-police themselves, and saying, hey, maybe you'd be better off down the way, and do all of that. Again, having the law on the books allows the flexibility. How we change it, how we enforce it, is then something we can take under advisement from the committee and from input like people like you. So, again, thank you for coming up and sharing, and hopefully we will get it right.
And we also have the responsibility for making sure bathers are safe. Of course.
So everyone for that. Correct.
I just like to talk about it.
Are you a bather or a surfer?
Are you a bather? Yes. Now, are you a bather or a surfer?
But back in the 70s, Little Plains was our beach, and we went there in the early 70s. We were kids. We were there with our families, but we were running all over. The break started getting good year after year, and basically the surfers came into that area, and the younger kids had to get out of the water, basically because our parents wouldn't let us go in anymore. We kind of got chased out. I wasn't aware of the law, but I knew by the end of one of the summers that all the surfers ended up moving to the east, and they stayed about 200 yards to the east. Not saying anything's right or wrong, and I think surfing's great too, but there was just a way that we separated the bathers from the surfers. And now at my age, I'm at the picnic area, and often I'm on the sand. I wait for the surfers to get out of the water because there's so many of them that you don't want to be in there at the same time. So you let them have an hour or so, and then when they get out of the water, then you go hop in. So I think you do need a law about designating areas. I really don't know how you're going to do that, but in the past it helped, and I think you have the need now that you have to somehow separate the two.
Thank you, Gary.
Christine, come on up.
Christine Whitaker. I live on Cameron Street. I don't surf, clearly, but for decades, there was never a problem. So it seems to me that it has to do with, wasn't the complaint to do with somebody, I heard, giving lessons for cash or something? And if that's your problem, I don't know why you don't just look at a swimmer as a pedestrian and the surfer as a car operating a vehicle, and that essentially the right-of-way should be for the swimmers wherever it is, and that it should be everywhere. That I mean everybody should be able to use it as long as it's not there isn't a problem. I don't remember ever seeing anybody for decades having a problem, but I think if you get into it just seems for commercial purposes that perhaps that's what needs to be legislated, is where it can happen for commercial and otherwise everywhere. Thanks.
Thank you, Christine. Tony, come on up.
Tony Piazza. Just a quick question about that commercial aspect. Are there can anybody use the beachfront for commercial purposes?
No.
Could I start a surf casting school if I wanted to?
Nor yoga or
Nor
anything else.
massage, nor sunfish lessons, nor.
The issue.
So the
We've had all
surf
these people come
schools,
to us.
how does that work? Because you can do yoga anywhere, but you can't really surf anywhere. So
It is a dilemma. That is a good question.
Okay.
Because I know why you're asking, because you've seen certain activities, as have I, actually occur on the beach. And yeah, you get.
no, honestly, it was just curiosity because I just
see yoga stuff on the beach. So I mean,
Okay.
Quite honestly, no. That is
so
part of the restrictions.
the beach is not. You can't use the beach for commercial purposes, as it stands now. Okay, thank you.
Good question.
The exception is the village board approving a surf school. And so that exception was put in the code, and that is something that the surf committee is going to examine how and where and what conditions that this board will grant licenses to the surf schools to operate.
Sort of, sort of similar. If you wanted to have a beach party, you'd have to get a permit, or if you wanted to do any event on the beach, a surf school could apply for some sort of a permit wherever the break is. And okay.
Right. Is there any additional public comment? So we can turn to the board for some more input. I would say my opinion here is simply I'd love to just repeal this. We can keep the language of that resolution that we had passed, and now we have all fall, all winter, and all spring to work with our surf committee to come up with the proper guidelines. Russell, you mentioned that this kind of turned into a big issue because of the use of social media. We should use social media to our advantage. We should have our surf committee. There should be one designated person, or it could be Matt Weeks, who runs Cooper's Beach, and he could be responsible for the Twitter and the Instagram and Facebook account. And every morning, if they decide to say the surf is here, this is where it should be, they can put that out on social media. And then at the same time, the swimmer in that group could designate this should be the swimming areas, and they could obviously use social media to kind of let people know and communicate where surfing might occur, where bathing might occur. But let's let our surf committee guide us on what should be done. But just to memorialize kind of what had happened this past summer, I think it'd be nice just to take this off the books, and then we could always put something back on later. But I would just hate to see something that's still in our law that says you can't surf, so I would just love to get this off the books today.
It doesn't say you can't surf.
It says certain. There's no ban on surfing. It's in certain areas. So we don't need to repeal the ban as it sits, because that was part of the misinterpretation of this whole social media garbage. Was there is no banning on surfing. There never was a ban on surfing. It's in certain months of the year, certain hours of those months. We're now beyond that, and it's not applicable. So it's really a non-event now. It's for when we get back to our summer season next year. So we'll have this committee and the public to weigh in on where should we go for next season. Well, that's my opinion.
But do you want to keep this language in here that's crossed off?
Currently, yeah. I don't need to say, yeah, because it doesn't apply to anything right now. We're beyond the season. We're beyond the months where it makes any difference surfing. Anybody can surf anywhere they want now. We're out of the summer season.
I'd like to see the surf committee get together and start.
I want to see what the surf committee, what they recommend doing with that before. I mean, I thought there was the whole idea of having a committee.
Exactly.
To them get the feedback what we do, because we're just bringing this up. That's what in the public. Like you came tonight. I want more people to show up and.
I don't know what you're saying.
Please come up to the board.
It says surfing, to use a surfboard, it says it says from 15th of June. I mean, yes, we understand this is no longer applicable, but do we want to just memorialize this and just take this out so it never says this ever again?
Quite honestly, I'm not worried about memorializing anything. We're here to legislate and get feedback, so that's, but that's my idea.
Public comment?
Anybody else, that's, I'm one of five up here.
So the board's choice,
I'm sorry, were you looking, you were looking to do a resolution on this tonight?
I would move forward with this. The only change I would also add is, this was a team effort, Wayne, so at the end it says it was sponsored by one person, but this was a team effort, so I'd like to give the whole board credit for this work rather than just one person.
I just like to keep public hearings open, no different than our storefronts, so.
So I was just going to say, your options obviously are to close this. You could then consider adoption of it as drafted. You could keep the public hearing open and obtain more comments or otherwise. I think there are your two choices. The third is you could close it and then table it if you were not going to adopt it. But I think the board, at least what I've heard here, is either adopt it in its present form, or is there some modification to that after further input? So I think that's the two choices, but the mayor seems to want to close the hearing and adopt it. So
we have one more public comment. I'll keep, this needs to be a consensus here, and so if we need to keep it open, it's fine.
I'm just saying, if you go ahead and you strike it, it's motivation to get really introspective and ask people. I think that was one of the biggest platforms you ran on, talking to the people about what they want to see. But the language in here, as it sits right now, is not. It doesn't serve anybody. It's not enforceable. The stuff is moving, time is moving. You can't. It's a flawed piece of legislation. Striking it completely motivates you guys and the committee and the people that you're going to be working with to actually find a solution before the next season, and I think that would be a great thing.
That's what we're planning on
You could be
doing
right, but it's still other people to weigh in whether it's a flaw. Your opinion, it's a flawed legislation. Other public members have not weighed in. I will assure you pretty confidently that somebody will arrive at this meeting next time that will counter that argument, that it's not a flaw. And that's what this process is about. That's all I'm saying. Huh?
I'm fine.
Well, no, it has nothing to do with you or me for that matter, but that's the whole problem. That's the whole idea, is that it has to be, I like to be left open for other people to come in, either agree with you or to not agree with you. The concept is great. We're here to make change on it. I think we do agree on that, because that's why we did make the change a few months ago. But now what I want to see is this room filled with more people on this topic, which it will, and you're going to see one half of the room is going to be for repealing it, and you're going to see the other half of the room that says keep it as is. That's from my experience of going through these things. Not even saying it's not going to happen. I'm just saying I don't need to do it tonight, is all I'm saying. That's me.
We were just saying that we want to get the committee together, and some of the members of our committee happen to be in Hawaii or West Coast right now, but surfing.
Well, one of the things I think is important, and I'm sure, as I spoke to one of the committee members yesterday as he was heading off to the great surfland, wherever he was heading, our committees are set up that they can participate telephonically.
Yeah.
So
That's right. That was actually
right. So I think
written in.
So I think we can still,
in between the waves,
these,
they can
in between waves.
Opine.
So I think it'd be great that.
I
That's the whole idea. That's why we
have no
did this.
problems
Yeah.
scratching it, but we better have a law next summer that protects our swimmers and little children from not only surfers, but from surf casting. Because really, it's not relevant, the time frame, but the essence is relevant, and I don't want to lose that. But I have no problems because it's a moot law, in my view. So I get your point, but I get your point.
All right, one more public comment. This is great. We actually enjoy the public comment. It's why we're here. So.
My name is Tony Piaz. I just would encourage the board to, I think that as a community we should be very friendly towards surfing, because if you look at the example of Amagansett Square, that's become very vitalized by the surfing community. The stores there are very surf-centric. Surfers eat a lot, and if it can be managed properly, it would be good for Southampton to be considered very surf-friendly, and maybe certain surf enterprises would move into town, and just think about that.
No, I think we are.
No,
that's
I
why
think we are. I
So
didn't-
quick to, do the resolution.
Okay.
There's no doubt, this is definitely a group up here that wants this to happen. The thing is that where we're struggling with is how do we negotiate the way that lessons and schools are given. So I think we're getting confused about, we're not going after surfers per se.
It's the
And,
commercial.
It's a commercial
intersection.
aspect of this, how we're struggling a bit.
Okay.
So that's really how this all came about. So that's it.
Yes.
So I think it sounds like we would like to adjourn this. We'll continue our discussion. And I'm fine.
This
That
will
seems
be
like what it's...
definitely just a matter of.
May I recommend so that there's enough time that you, if you are going to adjourn it for a month?
Let's do that, so it's not,
Yeah,
Yeah, so it doesn't come back up.
Come
we
up
can-
so quickly.
And we also get the committee
Make
together.
sure that
and-
the committee meets. Tomorrow I will put out some dates for the committee to first meet, and, within the next couple of weeks, so that we can start to get input from them.
So we've got October 10th and then
22nd.
22nd. Okay, so
I know we call it the surf committee, but shouldn't we be calling it the beach user committee, whether it be a surfer or a swimmer or a, boogie boarder or a...
Surf committee.
And we should even be thinking about the surfcaster, right?
we can make a resolution later, and we could call it Surf and Everybody Committee, but everybody else.
Right. We're moving on,
Surf
I
and
get it.
including everybody. So to the 22nd, let's make a
H2O committee.
H2O committee. I like that. All right, so let's
be the NLA.
Okay.
Let's make a motion to adjourn this to October 22nd.
Second?
Perfect.
Second. All in favor?
Aye. So we have Tony here. We'll move back to the, thank you, everybody, for the help here. It's great.
Thank you for understanding.
All right. And we have Tony Piazza here. Just to quickly touch upon the Moses Lane Park. We discussed earlier about the efforts to make it organic, eco-friendly, and as environmentally conscious as possible. So, Tony, if you've got some ideas and suggestions for us, we'd love to consider them.
Okay, first I want to apologize for missing it. Our wires crossed. We were actually over at the site kind of poking around and as designers getting very excited about it. So thank you for inviting us, but sorry we missed the boat. I just want to say that I'm kind of excited about this park as an amenity to that neighborhood, that part of the village. It's going to really be great. I happen to live over in that corner, and I walk through there now just for sort of little nature hikes, and I think that expanding it into the different uses that are proposed are fantastic. In considering all of the recent talk and initiatives that the village is taking on water quality issues, I think it would be, I'd like to urge to pull those sort of issues into the creation and design and implementation of the park as well. So what I'm talking about are different things like incorporating bioswales as passive drainage systems rather than doing the traditional dry well drainage where you're just taking surface water and running it straight directly into the water table.
Amazing, yeah.
Let's pass it through some things to clean it first, because I walk that site a lot. It drains very well. It shouldn't need a lot of active drainage installations. Think about plant selection sensitivity to low or no irrigation uses. So, naturally you would think of native plant material for that, but there are a lot of other things that, once established, shouldn't need irrigation. I'd hate to see this become like a water sink for the village. And if there are any way to incorporate habitat for wildlife, is like bird housing.
Since we've lost 3.5 billion birds since 1990 or something.
Yeah, I don't want to get too much into the science, but I just think it would be great, and it would be a real standout thing for a small village in New York to do, and consider as part of the design the closed loop biomass management, which is where nothing comes into the property, nothing goes away. So any green matter is composted on the property. That compost is then used to feed the different areas that need fertilizer on the property. And of course, I mean, at this point, I can't believe we're still having this conversation in our society, but toxin-free management program, no spraying, anything toxic, zero soluble nitrogen and phosphorus usage, and got to drive that home. And then consider work. Is there an opportunity here to make it a public-private partnership, because there's a lot of talent in this village, and I think that people would want to get involved to help out.
CPF doesn't allow that.
Yeah.
Oh, they don't.
Since it was purchased with CPF,
Yeah.
so that's, so yes, it'd be great, but there were certain restrictions based on the covenants of how it's written.
But can't someone give to the
But I think
village
there's
and the village
limitations.
then?
Yes, we can, there are ways to.
Yeah.
Because I have some friends that I know work in the city park system that have homes here that would, their depth of knowledge for this sort of thing is just,
There's a way we can collect and funnel both knowledge and funds.
Okay. And then I haven't seen the design. I just had a quick peek at it, but benches, picnic tables, everything you can incorporate to get people over there, and lots of shade. Shade is it. So trees, and the site is actually it's loaded with native cedars and stuff right now. So if any of that material could be thought about in the plan and reused and transplanted.
That's what they're planning on doing.
Okay.
Yeah, that was
Reusing
actually
all-
mentioned.
yeah.
Okay.
A lot of native
using a lot.
plants already. Do you remember what they were called? The
little blue stem meadow?
Yeah, there's a lot there.
So, yeah, he was discussing incorporating a lot of what's already there.
Okay, and then the other thing, there are multiple entrances to that park that could be utilized, and I don't know how the village feels about that, but just in my little neighborhood, there's one at the end of Prospect Street that could be used as an entrance, and then further down, I don't know the name of the street, it's a little tiny thing that actually intersects into this park. It might just be an opportunity to bring people walking from different parts of the village into that park without having to drive over and onto Moses, which is kind of busy already. So that's just the beginning.
Tony, could I meet you over there one day? Because that's part of my jurisdiction is parks.
Yeah.
And I'd love to meet you over there and just walk around with you and see your vision.
Sure. That would be great.
All right, good.
Okay. You know where I am on the highway, right?
I do, but Kimberly can give me your contacts. Yeah, Kimberly can give me your contacts.
Tony, I have a question for
Kimberly's our
you.
Rolodex.
We received a letter from not just one person, but two people saying that sunken tennis courts are not ecologically friendly. Is that true?
What does that mean?
Because I made a fool out of myself earlier saying...
I don't know that you're disturbing a soil profile.
Yeah, they said they're disturbing the soil profile, and that they dig dangerously close to the water table.
Yes.
And then in some areas, it's as little as 19 feet in the village?
It could be.
Okay.
I mean, this should all be studied, and not to mention the fact that land used to be a nursery, and there should be maybe some soil testing done, and there's a lot of plastic in the ground left over from the nursery operation, and only who knows what else could be in the soil. But I guess
now you bring that up.
Poor Gary.
Why are they being sunken? For noise?
It's our village code, and we did it as a quality of life noise.
Okay.
So you say you put arborvitae, trees around it, to greenery to absorb.
I think you could accomplish the same noise mitigation without sinking the courts. So.
It's in our code now.
Yeah. All right. Well, that person has a good point. There are, and it just, why move all that earth around if you don't have to?
Well, if you just build it.
Thank you.
Sure.
That was excellent.
Again, accept my apologies. That'll never happen again. But.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you.
Tony, maybe you could actually, we have some notes here, but follow up with the designer of our parks, and you can kind of send them a quick memo, if you don't mind, as to kind of what we discussed here. And I'm sure they'd be happy to meet with you and Mark as well, do a little site visit, whatever is needed. So thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
All right, so we can now move to discussion items, but I'd love to just take a quick 2-minute break, get a breather, and then we'll go to our chief and Russell about capital purchases. Take it from there. Thank you. We'll be right back.